The show is really about critical thinking. So I'm going to talk to scientists and researchers and artists and musicians and comedians, people who have really challenged the status quo in some way, and try to understand why we've lost this ability to challenge authority.
It's kind of easy to be rebellious, I guess, at the ends of our society. So if you're sort of quasi-homeless and strung out on something and kind of a punk rocker, then you can kind of rage and do what you want. And if you're at the sort of top of the food chain, then maybe you're Elon Musk, then you kind of say what you want and challenge people and you know, be provocateur and stuff like that. But for the people that are sort of the lower end of the middle, you know, you're making $7 an hour driving a pickup truck, you don't have any money, nobody wants to hear what you have to say. I kind of realized that, you know, if you rebel on a construction site, you get fired, you know, so I didn't want to get fired. So I just did what the man said to do. I just kind of kept it zipped for, you know, quite a long period of time. If you're really good at speaking up and speaking out, then I think there's a way to get paid. But generally for the lion's share of the people who are voicing counter and thus kind of unpopular opinions, then you will just get smacked down.
Part of that, I think, became really clear through COVID, right? And you had that funny bit where you said it was like crate training. And I thought that was brilliant. It is. It's like this notion of like, we're gonna indoctrinate you into this way of doing things just because. And then when you get older, you're gonna have a, you know, much more passive mindset about what your role in this is.
I was saying, in all earnestness, you're crate training these kids, and you gotta crate train dogs when they're puppies. You can't get them middle-aged. It doesn't really work to crate train. You know, if you really just sort of think about it, COVID statistically didn't affect kids at all. It was always an age thing, and that information was guarded pretty tightly by the news organizations. And it was an election year, and they wanted to get their people in power, and so the best way to do it was to sort of shut down society. So I was aware of it, and I spoke out about it as frequently as I could.
But like your tweet, for instance, I know you've said that you got a lot of phone calls from people being like, you gotta take that down.
It was Judd Apatow who called me, because he's a friend, and he said, you gotta take the tweet down, you know, and I was like, no. I mean, unless, if it's wrong, right, I would do it, but not if it's right. And then it's like, well, everyone hates you. And I'm like, well, so be it. I don't know. So what's the plan then? I lie so people like me? Those are the new rules? I remain silent so I can be popular?
Was any part of that surprising to you, that you didn't have more friends that were saying the same things?
I was a little disappointed by comedians in general, because I was like, you guys are always talking about the truth and about speaking truth to power and you know, standing up and saying unpopular things, and you're always glorifying those who did it in the past. Now you guys have turned into sheep and you're going by every rule?
It's a snowball effect if everybody falls for it.
The rebellious part of the artist is an act. That's not really who they are. So we found out who they really are.
The AIDS thing certainly seems like, I mean, maybe it wasn't rebellious in design, but it was, the act of doing it was a kind of rebellion from the norm.
Yeah, but it depends how you process rebellion. I drive through red turn arrows. I do it for myself, and I do it because I've deemed these arrows a bad idea, and they are, and I'm not really much interested in how it is processed. It could be processed as me rebelling, but to me, it's completely pragmatic.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to get stuck on the word. I think for me, it's more of like this idea of standing up for something that you see as bullshit or you think is wrong.
Yeah, I do think it's wrong, and I do think it's bullshit, but I don't look at the arrow any different than I look at AIDS or COVID. It's just, they're wrong. I'm not going along with this.
You're independent enough, right? You could lose sponsors or you know, there could be other ways of sort of threatening your livelihood, but it's not the same as working for some big media company, right?
Yeah, you can't work for ESPN and say what I say. you'll immediately be fired.
When the radio station turned to the Jack FM and you sort of left to launch your podcast, sort of future, do you feel like there was anything there that was sort of driving you to figure out something that was more stable or independent, or was it just the opportunity presented itself the way that it did and you went for it?
I was out of a job, for the first time in a while. It felt a little vulnerable financially. I had the kids, I had a pretty big nut, I had a pretty, comfortable lifestyle, mortgages, and, I had bills. I didn't think much about it. I just sort of went to work. I didn't have real succinct thoughts about it.
And what is that? Where does that come from?
I had some desperation in that my life was uncomfortable and I wanted to try to physically make it comfortable. I don't have self-esteem and I don't have pride. I can objectively look at myself. I wasn't pie in the sky thinking I was going to be some leading man when I'm not a leading man. I realistically assessed that I was a funny person. So I understood it. I didn't have to convince myself of it. And I didn't have to ask other people their opinions. So I realistically decided that I had a comedic ability, but I also realistically understood I didn't have experience. I had to learn the skill of being a carpenter, and I knew I had to learn the skill of being a comedian too, that it wasn't being funny was going to be just like being handy. You're just not going to be able to do layout and frame a house because you're handy. You have to know what the layout is. You have to be able to read the blueprints.
And so you applied that same rubric to comedy.
I did. People think comedy's invisible and then carpentry's tangible, but in my mind, they were the same thing. You're just going to have to do this and you're going to have to learn it.
It's really hard for people to argue back about something that's super logical. And I think so much of what we are experiencing today is like emotional-based reasoning, right? So it's like, I'm offended, so the world needs to change rather than me changing to be less offended at everything. And I think your ability to call bullshit on all of that insulates you because your audience actually, that's what they like you for, right?
Well, back to carpentry. There are no feelings based, it's like engineering, mechanical engineering. I was so steeped in that world for so long that when I got into comedy or COVID or like whatever it was, I just brought that to the equation. And so I do approach everything from a kind of mechanical, pragmatic, put the mask on in between bites. Like, okay, that doesn't make sense, so I'm not gonna do that.
So it's also that idea of just asking questions, right? Thinking like, okay, someone's feeding me some information as fact. I'm gonna push back and think like, what are the facts that we know? I don't necessarily disagree, but I wanna know why you think the way you do. Because I think the only way we learn is by having these conversations where like you think about something differently than I do. I listen to you. I process the information, I ask you some questions, and we both leave hopefully feeling more informed than we did. And like you may have convinced me that your ideas or your way of thinking about a, whatever policy are right. And that's a win for both of us.
It depends how attached you are to your ego and being right and being wrong. If you're not so married to that, then it could be a win-win situation. If you look at your ego and your batting average in terms of being correct or incorrect, if that's deeply held and a big part of who you are and too wrapped up in your self-esteem, then it could put you in a pretty vulnerable place. But if you came at it from a perspective of, I'd like to know more, or now I'm aware, or I love a good answer, then it becomes a positive. So it really becomes a matter of how fragile is your self-esteem, how fragile is your self-worth. I think a lot of people are insecure. I am a secure person. Being incorrect about a situation doesn't damage me. I'm not in the system. If you're in the system, you have to play by certain rules, whether you agree with them or not.
Thank you you for tuning in to this preview of Unleashed. I'm thrilled to share just a taste of what we've been working on, and I hope it sparked your curiosity. If you're enjoying what you've seen so far, I want to let you know that you can access the full episodes by subscribing to our YouTube membership or by becoming a member of the Broken Science Medical Society. It's a donation-only, pay-what-you-want model that supports the work that we're doing. Each week, we'll be bringing you deep, unfiltered conversations with incredible guests like Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew and Anton Garrett and Pashtana Durrani, amongst others. We'll be tackling the tough topics that others shy away from, and I hope you'll join us. Thanks again for your support.